It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is advise. Let's look at some definitions. The first definition is to offer suggestions about the best course of action to someone. The second definition says to recommend something. And the third definition is to inform someone about a fact or situation in a formal or official way. We'll talk about some examples of each of those three meanings as we talk about the word advise today. Advise is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, we're going to drop the E and then add ing. For the past tense and participle forms, all we need to do is add D to make the past tense, since the word already ends in E. The past and participle forms are pronounced advised, with a good D sound on the end. Let's look at a couple phrasal verbs for advise. The first is to advise someone about or advise someone on. Both of these are going to have the same meaning, which is to give someone advice about something or about doing something. Here's an example sentence. She advised me on what type of computer to buy. Another phrasal verb you might hear is advise against. It means to recommend not pursuing a particular plan or action. This is telling someone that you do not recommend that they do a particular action. Here's an example sentence. The mechanic advised against driving the car until the brakes were repaired. When you hear or see the phrasal verb advise against, it's usually going to be followed by a gerund. So that's the ing form. So in that sentence, you might look at it and think driving is another verb, but actually it's functioning like a noun. It is an activity in this sentence. Okay. The third phrasal verb we'll talk about is advise of. And it means to give information or a warning to someone about something. The meteorologists have advised motorists of thick fog this morning. So meteorologists, you might know that as people doing the weather on TV. That's their official title. And motorists is just another way to say drivers, people driving cars. So they have provided this warning. Slow down, pay attention, don't get too close to other cars because of the thick fog. Okay? Before we look at some more examples of using advise in sentences, I want to talk a little bit about active voice and passive voice. That's going to be our focus this week. So as we've practiced verbs for the 3 previous weeks, all of our sentences have been in active voice. And an active voice sentence begins with the person or the thing that is responsible for the action. Right? So we always refer to that as our subject. That can be a person, could be a thing, could be multiple people. So here are 2 examples of sentences in active voice. Mary washed the dishes. John rescued the cat. In the first sentence, Mary is the subject. She is the person doing the action. And the dishes, that phrase, is the object. The dishes receive the action. Okay? In the second sentence, John is the person doing the action, and the cat is what receives the action. Okay? You might encounter sentences in passive voice, though. If you're reading a newspaper or perhaps listening to news and other reports, sometimes you'll hear passive voice in textbooks as well. So sentences in the passive voice are going to begin with the person or the thing that is acted on. so our objects. Okay? It's possible that the person who did the action, they may not be included in the sentence. Or if they are included, it's going to come at the end and generally use the preposition by that person. So here are those same sentences we just practiced with, but they're in passive voice now. The dishes were washed, right? I could just put a period there and be done. Or I could say, the dishes were washed by Mary. Same thing with the other example. We're going to move the object, the cat, to the front of our sentence. The cat was rescued, period. Or we could say, the cat was rescued by John. You might be wondering, why do we have these different voices or different ways of structuring sentences? And there are several different reasons. We're just going to start with 3 today, and we'll kind of expand on this as the week goes along. But the first reason that we might use passive voice is because we don't know the person who did the action. So we can't specify or identify the exact person doing the action. The second reason is it might not matter. It might not be important who did it. We're just focused kind of on that action being done. And that sort of connects to our third reason. So if a writer or a speaker really wants to emphasize the object, they might use passive voice instead of focusing on the person who did the action. Okay? So today, we're going to focus on differences in simple past tense in the active voice and in the passive voice. And we're going to use our verb of the day, advise. Let's start with simple past tense in the active voice because I'm confident that's something you know how to do. For the affirmative, we're just going to use advise with a D on the end, advised. Doesn't matter what our subject is. If it's singular, if it's plural, I, you, always going to be advised. Here's an example sentence. They advised leaders on the next steps to take. For negative simple past tense, we want to use did not or the contraction didn't and then the base form of the verb. So no D in the negative here. Here's an example of that. We didn't advise shutting down parks. Okay. Finally, if we want to make a question, in active voice, simple past, we're going to change the order of our subject and did, our helping verb in this case. Did your doctor advise you to wear a mask when you are at the grocery store? We're going to take those same sentences now and change them into passive voice. And to make passive voice in the simple past tense, we're going to use the past tense form of be, so was or were. We'll use was with singular objects. You'll see an example of that in just a second. Or plural subjects will use were. So we're going to focus here. Remember, in our first sentence, they advised leaders. So leaders are receiving the action in that sentence. So we're going to move that to the front. Then we're going to use were, and then we'll use simple past tense again. Leaders were advised on the next steps to take. If it had just been one leader, singular there, we could have said the leader was advised. That's how we would make affirmative in the passive voice for simple past tense. Okay. For negative passive voice, we're going to add not after was or were. So our first example in the active voice, we didn't advise shutting down parks. So shutting down parks was our object. we're going to move that to the beginning of our sentence and then use wasn't advised. So here's our sentence: shutting down parks wasn't advised. If we want to make a question in the simple past tense, we're going to move was or were to the front and then have that object, the person receiving the action, and then we're still using advised as part of our question. So here is a simple past passive voice question. Were you advised to wear a mask when you were at the grocery store? So in all three examples here of passive voice, you don't know who was doing the action, who was giving the advice in any of these instances. And again, maybe it doesn't matter. Finally, today, let's look at a few words related to advise. And the first one is something that always comes up in my ESL classes, the difference between advise and advice. So first, a quick pronunciation note. Our verb advise ends with an SE, but the ending sound is like a Z, advise. Okay? The noun form, it ends in CE, but it makes more of an S sound, advice. Okay? So those could be easy to confuse, and another one of those points where English might make your head hurt a little bit. So advice, so the ICE ending there, that's our noun form, and it's another way to say guidance. So that our definition, guidance offered with regard to future action. Here's an example sentence with that. She always gives good advice. Another word you might hear is advisor. This word can be spelled ER or OR at the end. I think advisor with an OR is a little more common in North America, but either one would be fine. And this is a person who gives advice in a particular field. My example sentence here is, they are the new military advisors to the president. You might also hear this word advisor used if you're in college and taking classes. You might have one faculty member assigned to you to help give you advice on what classes to take, maybe where to look for certain internships, or connecting you to people in the field you'd like to work in eventually. The last two words we're going to talk about today are adjectives, and they're related. We have advisable, which means sensible or recommended course of action. Then we're going to have kind of the opposite, inadvisable. And this means an action is likely to have unfortunate consequences or be unwise. So I've heard these words used quite often as I watch the news and listen to people talking about the pandemic and what things we can do. And so I've used sentences here that I feel like I've heard or read. So, it is advisable to wash your hands for 20 seconds. So this is a sensible action. It is a recommended action. Okay? The opposite here, holding a large gathering, is inadvisable. It is not wise for us to be around a lot of people right now. There might be unfortunate consequences in that we make others sick or we get sick if we are attending a large gathering with a large group of people. I hope today has been helpful, and you'll get the chance to practice using the verb advise or some of its related forms as you speak and write this week. Have a great day.